Here are examples of some of our standard pyramids. Here we have biomass. This happens to be based on a tropical forest. And yeah, the base way wider than the next levels up are decay, saprotrophs there, and then the consumers much narrower there. Here's the energy versus the biomass. A little bit different, but same idea. Bottom layers much wider, much narrower as we go up. Very rarely you can get a different shape here. This has been documented in some cases of plankton, for example. What's going on? How can we have more of the stuff eating than the stuff being eaten? This occurs where we have planktonic algae that can grow very fast, and as it's being growing, it's being eaten, and so mass is building up. In our next level, it was all produced here, but the total amount available at any one time is smaller. For example, you can imagine this. Let's say we've got a field with grass and lots of cows. Potentially the amount of grass in that field may be less than the total weight of cow out there because the cows are eating the grass, but they ate the grass yesterday, and then the grass grows some, and the cows go back and eat that, and then the grass grows some, and the cows go back and eat that. And so we have somewhat more mass that is built up in our next level than is present at any one time there. But the energy up here, the mass here, all ultimately did come from down there. Not very common though. Several ways we might try to measure the productivity. We can look at the gross primary productivity, how much energy is being captured from the sun and used to make molecules. But again, those plants have to live. And they're not just capturing energy to make themselves tasty for us to eat. They're trying to do their own thing. So plants have to use energy. They are actually doing cellular respiration, using up some oxygen and making carbon dioxide. Now they actually make more oxygen and use more carbon dioxide than they are doing the other way, but they do have both. They've got their mitochondria doing the thing just like ours mitochondria. And so the energy that the plant used is not available for us. So net primary productivity is that gross productivity minus the stuff that the plant has used up. Typically, of that net productivity, the consumer eating the plant can use about 3/4. And then that consumer has its own respiration and so forth, uses about 2/3 of that. So we're down to only about 1/4 of the net that might be available to a secondary consumer to obtain. So if your big concern is, are you getting enough energy, eating lower on the food chain does better for that as a large scale. So for example, yeah, to some degree, if you eat more plant-based food and less meat-based food, you're tending to have a somewhat smaller impact on the whole environment than if you eat lots of meat and not so much on the plants. Here's a map showing areas of relatively high and low productivity. Now, confusingly, they have colors that look not very different for areas of low productivity and high, so it's a tad confusing here. But there is a significant gradient. The dark greens to red, there are places on the Earth where the typical production is around 1,000 times what it is in the very low areas. Low tend to be very dry desert areas or into ice. There's certainly not significant productivity in that, and why Greenland's looking that color. They probably have some issues with their picture here. We take a lot of the energy for the world as a whole. Around a third of the land-based net productivity is used by people, which leaves the remaining 2/3 for everything else. Patterns of productivity relate to the species richness that we were looking at back for our communities. Too high productivity, we may actually have low species richness. This tends to promote a few dominant species really taking over and not much else. Somewhat lower productivity area, you tend to see patchier distribution, and it's harder to dominate things when the distribution is more patchy, and so more things can coexist. Say, for example, if we were able to meet for class, and you came in and discovered that I had put chocolate out in the room. If I had piled it all in one corner of one table, first person in could potentially grab it all. If I spread it around the room, especially if I hit some, then the chances of that happening would be much less likely, much greater chance for everybody to get some. Of course, also, if folks are nice and share, then one pile could go through the whole group, but a more patchy distribution tends to make it easier for different ones to each get a small piece, as opposed to all in one place. Also, if we have stuff that tends to be a little more challenging to break down, a little slower energy transfers, again, that tends to not favor something really dominating. It's hard to spread fast enough to take over if you can't go fast. And so situations where the energy movement tends to be more gradual tend to have higher diversity. What gives us low diversity tends to be if there's really high levels of easy-to-use nutrients. One species can really dominate. We see this, say, in situations where human activity has caused over-fertilization. I mentioned before the possibility, say, of fertilizer washing off of farms and lawns into a stream, into the ocean, and that extra level of nutrients allowing certain algae to take off, become very abundant, and tend to smother out everything else. Sewage. That's another source of a bunch of nutrients, dumping that area into an area, and things that, like the chemicals in sewage, can really take over relative to other stuff. Natural areas that tend to have somewhat higher nutrients, that's something somewhat more long-term situation, and correspondingly, things have adapted, and so you don't tend to have quite as extreme a lack of diversity in cases where naturally there's a lot of nutrients there anyway. More different things have been able to kind of find their way in and reach a kind of competitive balance with each other. So you see this drop in species richness with high productivity, more so in areas that have human disturbance. Though it is true we have certain high stress environments where not many things can live there. What can live there with low competition can really thrive and be very productive. We see this, for example, in salt marshes along the coast. You may have noticed, you go to the beach in this general part of the world, anywhere in the southeastern U.S. Getting close, you often see areas as you cross over a bridge, perhaps, where there's lots of grass. If it's high tide, it may be sticking out of the water or by water's edge at low tide. And those are extremely productive areas. Lots and lots of grass is growing per time, and then a lot of that dead grass washes on out and becomes important food for the surrounding waters. Salt. Not many plants will do well with that. Yeah, there are algae that can handle it, but not many plants. And it's getting flooded and then drained and flooded and drained back and forth once or twice a day with the tides. That's not easy to deal with. You're going anywhere from, say, sunny, and that salt water left behind a puddle starts to dry up, and so you get extreme saltiness, down to low tide and it's rainy, and you've got practically fresh water. So you've got all sorts of range of salinity in the air, you've got the temperature variations with the weather, a lot of stress. Not so many things like living there, but those that can take off and dominate. Toxins affecting the environment. These will, not surprisingly, have negative impacts, whether it's pesticides, DDT, especially well documented the patterns there, radioactivity, various chemicals, a number of types of metals, stuff like lead, lead poisoning, that's not good, arsenic, mercury, a lot of toxins there, other chemicals made by various chemical manufacturing. These get in the environment and they can go up a food chain just like the energy does. Big challenges there. Persistence. These are often things that stick around in the environment for an extended period of time. Especially if we've made something in chemistry lab and it's not something bacteria are used to encountering, they don't have the enzymes that can react with it and break it down. So it tends to stick around. Again, being something the body's not used to, it doesn't know how to get rid of it. And so once it gets in the body, it tends to stay there. And then you get more, so maybe you're not getting a whole lot at any one time, but through your lifetime, you may build up a significant level of a toxin. Also, because this is not something that organisms are able to use, what gets in there tends to stay and then be passed on nearly 100% to something that eats it. Okay, remember those pyramids for biomass. So let's say we've got some starting chemical, and a little bit gets into our plants. One animal coming along eats a bunch of plants, and all the chemical from the plants it's eaten are in that. Now we have a predator that comes along and eats a bunch of those. Let's say it was rabbits that were eating the plants. And now our fox comes along and eats lots of rabbits. All the chemicals that were in all the plants that all the rabbits eats are ending up in the fox. So as we go up the food chain, we're kind of concentrating these chemicals at each step and thus having greater harmful effects from these chemicals. This tends to especially be a problem in water habitats, freshwater or ocean, because there tend to be a lot more steps along the food chain there than for on land. For example, we might eat cows that ate grass. Okay, well then we're getting a bigger dose than the cow or the grass, but we're just 2 steps up from the grass. If you eat a tuna sandwich. Okay, that tuna ate smaller fish. Those smaller fish may have eaten zooplankton, and the zooplankton ate phytoplankton, the algae. We've got another step, 2 more steps in there. We're number 5, not number 3 in that food chain. So, longer food chain, more concentration, and associated more problems there.